I myself, when I was a senior lawyer at the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, not once, but twice, the CIA approached me to become a mole. Now, I must say, if they did it with me, they did it with plenty others. And I think I have a suspicion who became. I told them, go and jump in Lake Geneva because I'm not going to do your job. But as I say, there's a problem when 80% of the staff of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and when I'm saying our human rights institutions, I'm also saying the UNCTAD, the International Labor Office, et cetera, 80% are ideologues. 80% are recruited because they are going to toe the line. And also among the rapporteurs, the vast majority of the rapporteurs are in the service of Washington and Brussels. They're not in the service of humanity. They're not there for you or for me. They're there to advance a worldview which is essentially incompatible with the Charter of the United Nations. And let's say it. The Charter of the United Nations is the closest thing we have to a world constitution. When people talk about a rules-based international order, I say, we have it, damn it. It is the United Nations Charter, which is a very thorough document and a very good document. The only thing we need is to enforce it. But it cannot be enforced for as long as 5 members of the Security Council block everything. Although I see a purpose for the veto power. Veto power, by the way, is Article 27 of the UN Charter. This privilege that 5 states have can be used for good or it can be used for evil. When Russia and China vetoed resolutions for bombing, interventions in Syria, etc., I think that that was a positive use of the veto power. You don't want to use force when there are other ways of doing things. Article 2, paragraph 3 of the UN Charter obliges all states members to resolve their differences by diplomacy, by peaceful means. You have an obligation to prevent warfare, not only to correct the conflicts. You have to address legitimate grievances, etc., etc. But when the United States uses the veto, and it's done it about 80 times to shield Israel from criticism, to shield Israel from sanctions, that is a misuse. This is an abuse of the veto power because it actually goes against the purposes and principles of the United Nations. That is, the veto power should only be used, not arbitrarily, not as an expression of hegemony. It should be used to advance the purposes and principles of the United Nations, which are, of course, peace, number 1, human rights, number 2, and development, number 3. Now, I wrote in my report 2012 to the General Assembly detailed plan of action, how to phase out the veto power and how to make sure that it does not get abused, how to limit the scope of this veto power. And either, I mean, it's no way you can get rid of it immediately because it would be, of course, vetoed. I mean, any amendment of the Council under Article 108 needs the approval of the Security Council. So forget trying to get rid of the veto once and for all. You'll have to do it step by step. And that's all explained in my report of 2012. And I picked that up in my book, Building a Just World Order. But going back, because I started teasing you with the idea of how to fix the problems today. Well, I think that with a megalomaniac in power in Washington, with hand-picked megalomaniacs around him, with Hexeth and Rubio and the others, I don't see any hope that this administration will ever go back to respect of the United Nations and of the United Nations Charter. They want to destroy it. That's what they want to do. They want to have absolute power. This is what I call retrogression. Not only retrogression in international law, in retrogression in human rights, this is a civilizational collapse. They want to go back to Roman times. They want to go back to a Pax Romana, now a Pax Americana, that would be just subjugation of the entire planet under the will of a megalomaniac called Donald Trump. Now, that is anachronistic. Call it a dinosaur. Call it anything you want. But it is a problem we are facing. It is a civilizational challenge that we must see it as it is and not try to soften it and not try to say, oh, well, you know, he doesn't really mean it, etc. He does mean it. I mean, he thinks he is an imperator mundi. He sees himself as legibus solutus, as above international law, unbound by any rules. And that is going back to Thomas Hobbes and to his Leviathan and to absolutism. He wants to reinstate absolutism, imperialism, and neocolonialism. That is what we're seeing. So the best hope for peace, the best hope for the survival of civilizational society is actually our agreement to live together under certain rules. And as I said, we have the rules in the UN Charter, and I consider the International Court of Justice to be our international constitutional court. And the drafters of the statute of the International Court of Justice did not give the International Court of Justice immediate direct application in the domestic legal orders of the member states, meaning there's no effective way to enforce judgments or advisory opinions of the International Court of Justice. It depends on the political will of states. And obviously, the United States under Trump, but also it wasn't much different under Joe Biden or under Obama. Whether Republican or Democratic, they're both megalomaniac. They are both hegemonial. And after all, who brought us into this situation, if not a Democrat called Bill Clinton? I mean, if Bill Clinton in the 1990s had respected the commitments made by George H.W. Bush, Bush father, and the commitments by our Secretary of State, James Baker, we wouldn't have had the war in Ukraine. There was no need whatever for NATO to expand eastwards. NATO was a legitimate defense alliance for 45 years when the Soviet Union was a virulently expansive country that wanted to make the entire world Sovietized. Now, obviously, we want to defend our identity and our rights and our choices and our self-determination. So it was legitimate to have a counterpart to the Warsaw Pact. But when the Warsaw Pact was dissolved in 1991, that made the North Atlantic Treaty Organization redundant. There was no more purpose for this NATO, which then morphed into a war coalition and then proceeded to commit crimes in the Yugoslav wars, and not only in Serbia, also in Bosnia and Herzegovina, etc., in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria. There have been serial violations of the United Nations Charter by NATO, which would qualify NATO as a, quote, criminal organization, unquote, for purposes of Articles 9 and 10 of the Statute of the International Military Tribunal for Nuremberg, which was adopted, as you know, in 1945, to be exact, on the 8th of August 1945, and which led to the conviction of 3 German organizations, including the Gestapo, as criminal organizations. Apply exactly the same criteria that the Nuremberg trial applied on the Nazis, and you would find that NATO is a criminal organization and should be disbanded. But of course, this is heresy, what I'm saying. Nobody wants to listen to that because of the massive public relations that has sold NATO as a necessary organization, as a beneficial organization, as a defensive alliance. We keep talking about defense. When in its history has NATO ever exercised defense? That's a good question. I mean, at least Donald Trump, in one instance, has told the truth, has been, shall we say, honest with everybody. He renamed the Department of Defense Department of War, because that's what it's about. I mean, at what time was the Department of Defense defending us, American citizens, from dangers abroad? Quite the contrary. The Department of Defense, with all of its color revolutions and all of its aggressions and regime change schemes, has actually increased terrorism and increased the dangers that we Americans suffer, not only in the United States itself, but abroad. I mean, I have apprehension. If I were to travel as an American in the Middle East, I would see myself as a target of terrorism.